The harsh glare of the community college library fluorescents didn't distinguish between the well-heeled and the desperate. To Julian, a male Omega whose family home was barely more than a shack 2 hours away, that sterile light was a spotlight on his poverty. He smelled vaguely of frying oil from the diner where he worked the graveyard shift, a scent that clung to his worn jacket like a second skin. He rubbed his temples, the legalese of the tort law review swirling into a headache. The scholarship exam was 3 weeks away, his only lifeline. Julian's entire life was a balancing act, a careful calculation of hours worked versus hours studied. Every moment a battle against falling behind. His mother's tireless work as a cleaner, his father's long-haul trucking. Their sweat and sacrifice were the foundation of his education, and he refused to let them down. The scholarship wasn't a want. It was a need. It was his only path to independence, a way to ensure he wouldn't be perpetually beholden to a system that favored the wealthy alphas and well-connected omegas. Then Caleb walked in, and the atmosphere shifted. Caleb, an alpha with a devastating smile and a trust fund deeper than the ocean, moved with a grace that Julian both loved and resented. Caleb smelled of sandalwood and expensive soap, a stark contrast to Julian's diner grease. They had been together for almost a year, a relationship that thrilled Julian with its passion, but constantly reminded him of the vast gulf between their worlds. "Hey, Jules." Caleb slid into the booth opposite him, dropping a thick, unopened textbook onto the table. "You look like death warmed over." "Charming," Julian muttered, not looking up from his notes. "I'm just focused. I need this scholarship, Cal. It's the only way I finish my degree without debt that would bury my family." Caleb shrugged, leaning back comfortably. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages that likely concerned yacht club meetings or weekend trips to Aspen. "It's a huge weight, I get it. But if you don't snag it, my parents can easily cover the tuition this year. They barely noticed the money leaving the account." Julian's pen snapped. He clenched his jaw, staring at his boyfriend. "That's not the point, Caleb. The point is earning my own way. I don't want your parents' charity. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Caleb sighed, missing the genuine hurt in Julian's voice. The pride of an Omega determined not to be a burden. "Fine, don't take my help, but you're burning yourself out for pride." The next few weeks were strained. Caleb started hanging out with a new crowd, specifically with Jamie, another male Omega whose pictures adorned the society pages. Jamie had a sweet smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a pedigree that perfectly matched Caleb's. He was elegant, connected, and possessed a casual assurance that Julian, in his second-hand coat, could never emulate. At first, Caleb just enjoyed the easy atmosphere of Jamie's circle, where conversations about studying pressure or financial woes didn't exist. But soon, Jamie keenly noticed that despite Caleb's complaints about Julian's stubbornness, his gaze always unconsciously followed the poor Omega studying in the library. Caleb's pheromones would always warm up when he talked about Julian. Jamie's jealousy began to swell. He wanted all of Caleb's attention and his status. He realized that as long as Julian was still in the school, still in Caleb's life, he could never fully possess the alpha. He had to create an irreparable situation. Julian didn't notice the shift until it was too late. He was too busy working double shifts and studying until his vision blurred, pushing his body to the limit. Then Caleb walked in, and the atmosphere shifted. Caleb, an alpha with a devastating smile and a trust fund deeper than the ocean, moved with a grace that Julian both loved and resented. Caleb smelled of sandalwood and expensive soap, a stark contrast to Julian's diner grease. They had been together for almost a year, a relationship that thrilled Julian with its passion, but constantly reminded him of the vast gulf between their worlds. "Hey, Jules." Caleb slid into the booth opposite him, dropping a thick, unopened textbook onto the table. "You look like death warmed over." "Charming," Julian muttered, not looking up from his notes. "I'm just focused. I need this scholarship, Cal. It's the only way I finish my degree without debt that would bury my family." Caleb shrugged, leaning back comfortably. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages that likely concerned yacht club meetings or weekend trips to Aspen. "It's a huge weight, I get it, but if you don't snag it, my parents can easily cover the tuition this year. They barely notice the money leaving the account." Julian's pin snapped. He clenched his jaw, staring at his boyfriend. "That's not the point, Caleb. The point is earning my own way. I don't want your parents' charity. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Caleb sighed, missing the genuine hurt in Julian's voice, the pride of an Omega determined not to be a burden. "Fine, don't take my help, but you're burning yourself out for pride." The next few weeks were strained. Caleb started hanging out with a new crowd, specifically with Jamie, another male Omega whose pictures adorned the society pages. Jamie had a sweet smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a pedigree that perfectly matched Caleb's. He was elegant, connected, and possessed a casual assurance that Julian, in his second-hand coat, could never emulate. At first, Caleb just enjoyed the easy atmosphere of Jamie's circle, where conversations about studying pressure or financial woes didn't exist. But soon, Jamie keenly noticed that despite Caleb's complaints about Julian's stubbornness, his gaze always unconsciously followed the poor Omega studying in the library. Caleb's pheromones would always warm up when he talked about Julian. Jamie's jealousy began to swell. He wanted all of Caleb's attention and his status. He realized that as long as Julian was still in the school, still in Caleb's life, he could never fully possess the alpha. He had to create an irreparable situation. Julian didn't notice the shift until it was too late. He was too busy working double shifts and studying until his vision blurred, pushing his body to the limit. The betrayal came swift and cold. It happened the day before the scholarship review board met. Jamie claimed his vintage Patek Philippe watch, a family heirloom worth a small fortune, was stolen from his locker, while Julian was the only one in the hallway. The school security footage was inconclusive, but Jamie was convincing, tearfully pointing the finger at the desperate lower-class Julian Vance. "He needs money, Caleb," Jamie cried in the dean's office, where Julian stood, pale and shaking with silent fury. "I saw him eyeing it earlier that day." Julian looked to Caleb for support. For the alpha, he loved to stand up for him. Caleb met his eyes for only a second before dropping his gaze, a slight flush rising on his neck. Caleb knew the accusation was false. He'd been with Julian when Jamie had the watch, and again when Jamie had claimed to lose it. I can't say I'm surprised, Julian," Caleb said, his voice hesitant but firm. "Things have been tight for you. Jamie's watch is very expensive." It was a punch to the gut more brutal than any physical blow. Caleb knew Julian's integrity, yet he stood by Jamie. Later, Julian would learn that Caleb had subtly suggested to the dean that the scholarship money Julian was vying for should probably go to a more stable and trustworthy student, perhaps someone like Jamie. Julian didn't wait for the disciplinary hearing. He simply walked out of the dean's office, out of the building, his dreams crumbling around him. The universe, apparently, wasn't done with him yet. That evening, he received 2 phone calls. His boss at the diner fired him to avoid any reputation issues, and the hospital informed him that his mother's test results were in. Cancer, stage 3. Julian stared at his empty bank account balance, the weight of the world crushing his Omega spirit. He needed a miracle, or a devil's bargain. The mysterious email that arrived a few hours later offered just that. The sender was named Ian, and the terms were clear, horrifying, and his only way out. Ian's offer landed like an ice-cold stone in Julian's fevered mind. The email was professionally written, almost devoid of personal touch, but the terms were brutally clear. Term 1, bear an heir for me. Term 2, a duration of 1 year, during which you will move into my residence and act as my secret companion. Term 3, upon successful birth, you receive $1 million. Term 4, all medical expenses for your mother will be fully covered by me during the contract period. There was no name, only a lawyer's contact information. It was a pure transaction, a contract that traded his body and his Omega nature for survival. Julian sat in his cramped room, the air thick with the smell of cheap instant ramen. Outside the window, the city's neon lights blinked, a stark contrast to his dark destiny. He stared at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions tearing through him: humiliation, fear, and a final, desperate sliver of hope. His mother's life hung in the balance. He had no choice. He replied to the email. 3 days later, Julian signed the 30-page confidentiality and contract agreement. He met Ian's lawyer, a poker-faced beta. He did not meet Ian himself. Ian seemingly wished to keep the transaction as professional and detached as possible. Julian dropped out of school. He packed his meager belongings, leaving no word for Caleb, the alpha he once thought would love him forever. He only left a note for his mother, explaining that he found a well-paying job that required him to move to another city, and assuring her that her treatment costs were taken care of. He moved into Ian's mansion. It was a modern estate nestled on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by private walls. The house was vast but devoid of any warmth. Ian was a mysterious billionaire, tall and aloof, with deep-set eyes that seemed to see through everything. His pheromones radiated an overwhelming, icy dominance, asserting his absolute control. Ian explained the rules to Julian in a monotone voice. There is no love between us, only a contract. You are responsible for my living arrangements. The house manager will inform you my habits and other things to attend and heed. You'll have your own room, but when contract obligations call, you must be available. Julian nodded, his heart heavy. He knew this would be difficult, but he underestimated the totality of this dehumanizing treatment. Meanwhile, back at the college, Caleb's life unraveled the moment Julian vanished. The absence of Julian's warmth left a void that Jamie's glossy perfection couldn't fill. Caleb realized the magnitude of his betrayal. He found Jamie outside their last class, the high society Omega laughing with friends. Caleb pulled Jamie aside, his alpha pheromones flaring in repressed anger. We need to talk. We're over. Jamie's sweet smile vanished, replaced by a cold sneer. Excuse me? Over? I'm the one who did you a favor by getting rid of that needy little rat. He was the best thing that ever happened to me, you manipulative little... Caleb cut himself off, his jaw tight. "He didn't steal your watch, Jamie. I know he didn't. You framed him." Jamie tossed his hair with a defiant flick. "Prove it. The school believed me. The dean believed me. You believed me for a while there. That scholarship money is rightfully mine now, even though it means nothing to me." "That was never the point," Caleb yelled, drawing stares from passers-by. "The point was Julian's integrity. The point was his future, which you just destroyed with a stupid lie." "Oh, cry me a river, Caleb," Jamie spat, venom lacing his words. "He was poor, he was desperate, and frankly, he was an embarrassment to your status. You should be thanking me. You needed someone who fits in your world, someone like me." "I don't need a trophy, Jamie," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I needed a partner, and you're just a selfish, entitled boy." He turned his back on Jamie's furious, jealous face and walked away, beginning a desperate, futile search for Julian that yielded no clues. In Ian's mansion, life was monotonous and oppressive. Julian worked hard, learning to cook well and take care of the massive house. Besides those temporary housekeepers and bodyguards, the only other person who lived there was Mr. Harrison, a quiet, older beta who had served as the house manager for decades. Mr. Harrison moved through the halls with a stoic efficiency, rarely speaking beyond necessities, but his eyes held a knowing sadness. One evening, a few months into the contract, Ian was out on business. Julian was in the study, organizing the books, when Mr. Harrison came in to adjust the climate control. "Mr. Ian is a difficult man," Mr. Harrison said quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle, breaking his usual silence. Julian stopped dusting. "He's very private. He built these walls high after the last time," the old man sighed, dusting a shelf with a careful hand. "You seem kind, Julian, kinder than the last one." Julian was surprised by the confidence. "The last one?" Mr. Harrison paused, a deep melancholy settling on his features. "Ian was once warm, believe it or not. He loved someone deeply, another Omega, named Elias. Ian gave him everything, his trust, his heart, access to his entire empire. But Elias only saw a weak, trusting alpha he could exploit. He ran off with Ian's closest business partner, taking millions in corporate secrets and leaving Ian for dead in a rigged plane crash. Ian survived, barely. It broke him, turned him to ice. He never believed in love again." Julian listened, a wave of empathy washing over him. The coldness wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Ian was a man terrified of being hurt again. This new understanding changed how Julian interacted with Ian. He noticed the slight flinch when he moved too fast, the way Ian's eyes tracked him when he thought Julian wasn't looking. Julian's tenderness and sincerity began to chip away at the ice. Ian started noticing Julian's efforts and spending more time at home. The professional relationship began to subtly shift into something deeper, though unspoken. When they were in bed, Ian took care of Julian's feelings and even made him satisfied first before his own need. Ian still maintained his distance, but his presence felt less like a jailer's and more like a deeply guarded man's. Days turned into weeks. Julian's body changed. A year later, he was pregnant with Ian's child. He looked at his belly, a swirl of emotions overwhelming him. This child was his hope, but also a testament to his fall into this contract. he began to have regrets. Looking at the icy Ian, he felt a consuming fear. Could this man be a good father? Could he give his child love? Or he only wish an heir to inherit his empire? The answer seemed to be obvious. Ian never showed excitement about the baby's arrival. He merely handled the medical appointments with cold efficiency. With weeks of consideration, Julian made a decision. He couldn't let his child grow up in such an environment. Once the baby was born, he would take the child and escape from Ian. He believed Ian wouldn't be a good father. He had to protect his baby. The delivery room was sterile and cold. Julian, exhausted and sweating, held his newborn son in his arms. The baby was small, pink and healthy, a perfect blend of omega sweetness and alpha strength. Julian's heart swelled with a fierce, protective love. Ian was there, per doctor's orders. He stood by the window, a silent, imposing figure. When Julian looked at him, hoping for a flicker of tenderness, Ian only offered a single, clinical glance at the child before turning away and leaving the room. That glance confirmed everything Julian feared. Ian saw this baby not as a son, but as a transaction completed, an heir acquired. Julian's resolve solidified. He couldn't let his child grow up in this gilded cage, raised by a man who couldn't love. A few days later, back at the mansion, Ian had an urgent business meeting that required him to travel for 2 days. This was Julian's chance. Under the cover of a moonless night, Julian slipped out of the master's suite. He had a small bag packed with baby essentials, the $1 million secure in a separate bank account, and a plan to disappear into a small, anonymous town miles away. He hailed a taxi, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. But fate was cruel. The universe wasn't done playing with Julian Vance. Jamie, consumed by a toxic cocktail of fury, jealousy, and humiliation since Caleb had dumped him, had been watching the mansion for weeks. When he saw Julian and the baby get into the cab, he knew exactly what to do. On a deserted stretch of highway just outside the city limits, Jamie executed his plan. A sleek black SUV swerved violently, cutting off the taxi and forcing it to a screeching halt. Julian gasped, clutching his son to his chest. The taxi driver was shaken but unharmed. Then the SUV doors flew open and Jamie emerged, his handsome omega face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. Jamie dragged Julian and the crying baby out of the taxi and forced them into the SUV. Jamie drove erratically, deep into an abandoned warehouse district. He was irrational, unhinged, rambling about revenge and ruining Julian's life. "You thought you could steal my Caleb and get away with it, Julian?" Jamie shrieked, consumed by jealousy. "You ruined my life. Now I'm going to ruin yours." Julian and his baby were kidnapped, but Jamie wasn't the only one on the move. Ian, who had felt a cold unease when he realized Julian had left, used his significant resources to track Julian's last known location. He was in his car, driving faster than legal, using GPS tracking to close the distance. The wheels of fate had turned to their final moment. Ian burst into the desolate warehouse. Jamie spun around, startled. "Ian!" Julian screamed, holding the baby tightly behind him. "Let them go," Ian commanded, his voice cold steel, his alpha pheromones flooding the air with dominance, trying to suppress Jamie. Jamie only laughed, a hysterical sound. The proud billionaire actually came for his hired whore. How sweet. Well, let's see how fast you can be. See if you can beat my bullets." Time seemed to slow down. Ian didn't hesitate. He lunged, shouting Julian's name. Bang! Bang! Julian watched in horror as Ian staggered back, the impact of the bullets forcing a groan from his usually stoic lips. He slumped to the concrete floor, blood quickly spreading across his expensive shirt. "Ian!" Julian cried, the baby wailing in the background. Jamie, shocked by his own actions, dropped the gun and fled the scene in a panic. Julian rushed to Ian's side, forgetting all about contracts, all about his escape, all about Caleb. He saw the pain in Ian's eyes, a vulnerability he had never seen before. In that moment, as Ian looked up at him, Julian finally understood. The coldness was a shield. The distance was self-preservation. Ian loved him. He loved the baby. He just didn't know how to show it after being hurt so badly before. "You idiot!" Julian sobbed, pressing his hands against the bleeding wounds. "Why would you do that?" "No one can hurt you before me," Ian whispered, his eyes locking onto Julian's face, filled with an intensity that spoke volumes more than any words of love ever could. "My son, my family." The sirens started wailing in the distance. Julian held the baby close, tears streaming down his face as he cradled Ian's head in his lap. He realized his escape plan was foolish. He had made a mistake in judging Ian. With Julian's care and love, Ian recovered quickly in the hospital. Jamie was arrested. Caleb, hearing the news, came to the hospital, looking broken and begging for forgiveness. But Julian simply shook his head. "You've chosen your path, Caleb. I chose mine." After Ian was discharged from the hospital, their lives took on a profound sense of normalcy they both desperately needed. The terrifying ordeal with Jamie had stripped away their pretense, and the contract was a relic of the past, physically torn up by Julian the moment Ian was out of the ICU. Caleb had been in touch briefly, sending a sincere apology via text message and hoping to reunite. But Julian kept the communication brief, focused solely on his recovery and his future with his new family. He had closure, and he wished Caleb well, but that chapter of his life was irrevocably closed. The mansion was no longer a gilded prison, but a sanctuary. Ian learned rapidly how to be a father, his initial awkwardness replaced by a quiet devotion that melted Julian's heart faster than any grand romantic gesture. He would spend hours simply holding their son, a softness in his eyes that Julian had once thought impossible. One crisp evening, a few months later, Ian led Julian out to the mansion's extensive rose garden, which Julian had helped revitalize. The stars were bright, and the air was calm. Ian stopped by a blooming rose bush and turned to Julian, his intense gaze unwavering. "Julian," he began, his voice slightly rough with emotion, "the contract was a mistake. Our life now, it's not bound by terms or money. It's bound by love. You have healed parts of me I thought were permanently broken." He paused, taking Julian's hands in his. "I don't want you to be my contracted lover. I want you to be my husband. Our son needs both his parents, together, not just cohabiting an arrangement. Will you, Julian, love of my life, marry me? Julian's eyes welled up instantly. Yes, he whispered, a smile breaking across his face. Yes, I will. Ian planned a small, intimate ceremony for the next month, prioritizing privacy and close family. Julian's mother had survived the surgery and under recovery. Both his parents were flown in and stayed in one of the mansion's guest wings, their faces radiant with relief and joy to see their son so happy and healthy. Their financial worries a distant memory, thanks to Ian's generosity. Mr. Harrison, the faithful old Beta House manager, oversaw the arrangements with a proud smile, finally seeing the true happiness return to the house he had managed for decades. The wedding day was perfect. It was held right there in the garden. Julian wore elegant white formal wear, his omega beauty enhanced by the subtle floral scent of his natural pheromones, which was gently mixed with the calming sandalwood of Ian's dominant alpha scent. They exchanged vows under an archway of white roses and greenery, with only their parents, Mr. Harrison, and the baby present. The vows were simple and deeply personal. Ian promised to protect Julian and their son, to be honest and open, and to love without reservation. Julian promised to cherish their new life, to offer the warmth and light that Ian's life had so desperately needed. As they sealed their vows with a gentle kiss, the baby gurgled happily in his grandmother's arms nearby. The moment felt final and absolute. Julian had found his happy ending, not in the halls of academia he had fought so hard for, but in the arms of a wounded billionaire who had saved him, and in the promise of a future filled with family, love, and genuine security. The ice in Ian's heart melted forever by Julian's tenderness and the love for their child. The mansion was finally a home. The ice in Ian's heart melted forever by Julian's tenderness and the love for their child. The mansion was finally a home.